Hello, everyone. This is the second recording for a class on early Greek philosophy. Today, I want to talk about two sets of themes in epistemology, which come to be important and long-lasting themes in Greek thought. One cluster of ideas relates to sense perception and how sense perception is a source of knowledge. The other cluster of ideas relates to falsehood, deception, mere appearance, and how it contrasts with reality and truth. Now, I'm going to turn again to Homer, and that requires some elucidation. Homer is not a philosopher, so why turn to Homer? Homer does not lay out theories, Homer does not examine arguments. And it is not customary in an introduction to early Greek thought to draw so much on Homer. However, I take my cue here from Plato. Plato considers Homer divine. He treats him as a resource for sophisticated and at times challenging and rebellious and revisionist ideas that invite philosophical reflection. And I would like to suggest that we go along with this. So here's the first theme, sense perception as a source of knowledge. When you read the Iliad and the Odyssey, you may ask yourself, what are the ways in which, according to that kind of Homeric universe, as you may call it, one can come to know something? And you may initially ask that question with respect to the poet. And that is kind of invited by the way both of the epics begin. The beginning of the Iliad is, sing goddess, and the beginning of the Odyssey is, tell me muse. So this is quite similar to each other. The thought is the poet invokes a goddess, a muse, asks them to tell them the story, and then the poet is going to tell us the story. But how does the muse know all of this? How does the muse know who sailed to Troy and what happened and so on and so forth? The presumption is that the muse has seen all of this. And that presumption is most clearly salient in a famous passage in Book 2 of the Iliad, the so-called Catalogue of Ships. That is a lengthy passage where we get a list of the ships of the Greeks that sailed to Troy to start the Trojan War. And it is so detailed, it tells you so much about who is on these ships and so on and so forth, that it seems that no one who hasn't seen this, who hasn't actually looked at this, would be able to tell you about it. So the muse tells the poet about this, and the catalogue of ships even starts with another invocation of the muse. Tell me, muse, and then comes this long list. The muse tells the poet, and then the poet tells us. And that introduces two sources of knowledge, as it were, sense perception and knowledge of testimony. Now, when we look at the protagonists of the plot, as it were, in the Iliad and the Odyssey, how do they come to know things? Some of them are gifted seers or interpreters of signs. So, all in all, it looks like there are three sources of knowledge: sense perception, testimony, and interpretation of signs. And in offering that kind of reconstruction, I follow a quite famous paper by Edward Hussey, who reconstructs this as a framework in epistemology that we should not underestimate. It can look quite rudimentary, but when you think about later frameworks in epistemology, for example, the Epicureans, who are rather sophisticated, sort of proto-scientific thinkers, they do something quite similar. They start with sense perception, they add testimony, and then they add a theory of sign inference. What is it that we can infer from signs? So that is the first cluster of ideas that I want to flag. The second cluster relates to falsehood. Falsehood is a big theme. In both the Iliad and the Odyssey, there are a lot of liars and deceivers in both of these epics. The gods deceive people, people often need to ask, so the protagonists of these poems need to ask whether they are being deceived by a god. And some of the main characters are depicted as masterful deceivers. Odysseus is the proverbial liar and trickster. And that introduces a kind of big distinction between mere appearance, deceptive appearance on the one hand, and reality on the other hand. And it introduces, as it were, the thought that wherever, in any kind of context, there's always the question of whether what you encounter is mere appearance or reality. And that is going to be a theme throughout early Greek philosophy. Okay, so those were the two themes that I wanted to introduce by reference to Homer. And now I want to say just a little bit more about why I draw so much on Homer, or why I think it is worthwhile to read these epics, see those, in my view, intriguing ideas, and then take them seriously as you continue to study early Greek thought. If you have studied early Greek philosophy in the past, chances are you were reading Metaphysics Alpha by Aristotle. That contains a kind of detailed account of what Aristotle says his predecessors say about first causes and principles. So this expression, causes and principles, first causes and principles, that is Aristotle's expression. And he ascribes views about that to a number of predecessors of his. And classes on ancient Greek philosophy often just start here. Let's read Metaphysics Alpha, because that is a way of getting a sense of what do the earliest philosophers say. Well, here we have Aristotle's report. Let's look at this. And I want to say to this, well, hold on, we will get there. We will also read Metaphysics Alpha, and we will ask, what is it that Aristotle is telling us about his predecessors? I just want to suggest that we take not only Aristotle, but also Plato as our guide when we study early Greek philosophy. And doing so leads us, I want to suggest, to a more varied set of ideas to pursue throughout the history of Greek thought.